A sixth straight Carrow Road defeat for Norwich City. You think you hit rock bottom and they just keep falling. Welcome to this week's edition of the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast. I'm your host Connor Southwell, joined by Paddy, Davitt and Sam Seaman in the wake of that 1-0 defeat to Bristol City. There were chants for Liam Manning, for Ben Knapper, for Zoe Webber, all to go. It was another disappointing day to be associated with anything yellow and green, and that is becoming all too familiar. Paddy, I think when you think about today and the build-up to it, it felt like the fans knew it was a big day. I know you've put this in your pointers. Norwich City legend Darren Huckabee tweeted about the fact it was a big day. Didn't look like the Norwich City players got the message.
No, and we'll get into it in due course, but I put more or less that point to Liam Manning. Where was the urgency? Where was the bravery that he said they needed to turn, particularly the Carrow Road debacle that it is now turned into, around? And he, paraphrasing, but he couldn't defend that performance, and was quick to stress that there was a culpability that spans the players himself, Ben Knapper, if you want to bring him into the equation, and everybody at the club. But for me, those players today, I mean, given, as Hooks rightly said, I think he called it like this is potentially the biggest game in years. And for me, implicit in what he was trying to get at was the on-the-pitch malfunctioning team under Liam Manning, but also the off-the-pitch. You were at the Lion Castle a few days ago, and genuine anger from probably the most loyal collection of fans in terms of the long-serving season ticket holders who are going to be evicted in that Carrow Road revamp plan that's has been, choose my words advisedly, that has been not thought through, I don't think, on any level. And for the club, for Liam Manning, for that group of players, for Ben Knapper, but for the club and its fan base today was bigger than 3 points. And for those players to go and give that level of passive, no energy, no real urgency, no desire to grab that game, as Liam Manning had talked up in the pre-match, is criminal, and it's unforgivable. And as much as we will probably spend a lot of this podcast on the status, job-wise or other, of Liam Manning and Ben Knapper, I think we have to start calling out these players as well. Some of these players span Manning. They were there under Torrup, and that seemingly unravelled. As Liam Manning said pre-match, he can look himself in the mirror and know he's giving absolutely everything, and that's his challenge to his players. Those players haven't given absolutely everything today or for the previous 9 games. And as much as we'll, again, I'm sure, dig into Liam Manning and where he's failing in terms of the identity of this team and the coaching element of it, you need buy-in from that group of players, and that group of players have not bought into Liam Manning or his methods. And I say that because we're sat here today dissecting a 6th straight Carrow Road defeat in League and Cup, 8 points from 10 league games, hovering outside the bottom 3, and they are, as it stands, going to find themselves competing at the wrong end of the table to what we were told this season was going to be badged. And there's a myriad of reasons for that. You cannot lay the blame at any one individual's door. It's a collective failure from top to bottom of that football club. But narrowing the focus, what we saw from that group of players today was staggering, really, in terms of, as Huckabee had rightly badged it in his tweet, step forward, do your jobs, show what this means today. They didn't do that. They didn't step forward. If anything, they took a step back. And Liam Manning was the first to call that out in his post-match, accusing his players of a lack of hunger and almost hiding. They were the words he actually used. I'm not putting words in his mouth. It's a sad state of affairs when a head coach has to turn around and publicly accuse his players of basic tenets that you expect any professional footballer to go out. And then obviously you may come up against better players. There may be a deficit in quality, and maybe then also be coaching elements that aren't happening. But the fundamentals, to be questioning those 10 games in, Norwich are bang in trouble. Make no mistake about it.
Well, Sam, we know the the club like to deal in data, so a couple of points at this moment in time. They are currently tracking below the average required, which I think is about 42, 43 points. Typically required on average since the Championship reform to stay in it. They are underneath that total at this moment with 8 points after 10 games. There was a stat that NCFC numbers put out around the 6 home defeats to start the league season in 30 years in this division. It's only happened, Norwich are the 6th team to do it, it's only happened on 5 other occasions. 4 of those 5 teams got relegated. I mean, as Paddy said there, it was three chances really that they created today. Schwartau's header in the first half, which I wouldn't call a high value chance. 2 in the second half, and Emi Marcondes cut back from Schwartau, I think it was, and then obviously the one with Jack Stacey that got clawed off the line. Bristol City, in contrast, had 21 shots. They had an XG of nearly 3. I mean, they're banging trouble, aren't they, by nearly every single metric that you look at. 10 games is at the point where people say you need to start looking at the league table. I mean, people should be looking at it inside that football club with significant concern.
Yeah, and you give those numbers as they relate to previous relegated sides and relegation trouble. And I think up until today, whenever it's been mentioned, I've kind of been pretty casual about it. And whether that's, part of it might be the confidence that Norwich would never be dragged into that sort of battle. And obviously it's been a long time since they were. That could have been part of it. But I for whatever reason, I just wasn't particularly concerned until today, when I think for the first time, I and probably a lot of Norwich fans am genuinely looking at things going, they could be in trouble with this situation if it carries on like this, because it's not now in the stage of the season or the performances or Manning's tenure where you're going, okay, it's early and things are going to change. 6 games is a real significant pattern. And it feels like they're finding ways to lose at home that you're not even predicting. This game felt, and you point out those Bristol City chances. I thought a lot of them actually came after they scored the goal. But before the goal, I thought it was a real typical 0-0 draw that was just kind of petering out, and they still found a way to lose it. And in the opposite way to, how you talk about the best teams finding ways to win when they're at their best, I don't think this was a very good performance from Norwich at all. But even when they are playing well, they're finding ways to lose when they are at their best or when they are improving performance-wise. So they just feel like a losing team. And that, for me, is a major characteristic of the sort of teams that get relegated from various divisions. So it does feel now like there needs to be some sort of action. I'm not saying exactly a Manning, but whatever the action is, something needs to change behind the scenes, and that could just be tactics, it could be personnel, it could be whatever motivational tool that clearly isn't working at the moment. But yeah, they've been doing things a certain way for a while now. Manning's talked about the fact that you have to continue to believe in what you're doing and your processes and things like that. I don't think he has any reason to believe in those right now, to be honest. And maybe more importantly, given the demise of Yanisov Torup and how that happened, I don't think the players have any reason to believe in Manning's way of doing things at the moment. So, something drastically has to change, because I think now, although a lot of people would have been looking at it going, Norwich, there's no way Norwich could get dragged into a relegation battle in this division. I think for the first time today, I'm thinking it's getting pretty serious, those worries.
Yes, yeah, and again, that is a staggering point for us to be considering, given this football club has spent £55 million in the last 3-4 windows, 2 years essentially that Ben Knapper's been in post. We will come on to all of that later on. But I mean, Paddy, you spoke to Liam Manning after the game. You mentioned some of his comments there. They were pretty scathing about a group, let's be honest, I feel has got very little personality about them, very little leadership about them. I think there is truth in terms of
no leadership, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's 3 or 4 players I think you can expect. If we're going to say Jack Stacey, Kenny McLean, Harry Darling, Josh Sargent, probably a 4. Yeah. Maybe Vladan Kovacevic, you could add to that, and the rest is just there's not much there, is there? I mean, sorry, state in the first half when you've got 19-year-old Oscar Schwartau essentially trying to beat 4 players because he's got no options around him. There are coaching points to this, absolutely, and we will absolutely come on to those. I'm not sure an hour is going to be enough to get through everything. But it's again, to kind of bring it back to the first point and to link it to the second, it doesn't feel like a group of players that really understands the gravity of the situation they're in at the moment, and that probably is the most concerning aspect about it at this stage.
Yeah, well, now you've said that, I mean, his first answer actually today post-match was, again, paraphrasing, but that they're too nice. They're too nice, that they don't show that ruthlessness, which is maybe chance creation.
Let me come into that, because there was a moment in the second half where Jakov Medic goes down with cramp. We can have a different debate about a centre-back going down with cramp at home at Carrow Road.
One who can't run.
And the game's still in play. Norwich are chasing a goal. I don't mean it to shout Pelle Matsen out, because I thought in general he was probably one of the better, brighter performers in a very low bar. But he's ran over, whilst the game's going on, with Norwich chasing a goal, to go and help Jakov Medic with cramp. I mean, that does feed into the idea that this is too nice a team at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, basically, that's what their head coach, who sees them day in, day out, who works with them day in, day out, who has to try and extract something from them that is better than 8 points from 10 games, is accusing them of. They're too nice. There's no nasty streak to them, and that probably cuts to the point you're making about where is the leadership, And it shouldn't be you have to look at a core of players. It's just from the back to the front in that group of players. There's personality is the word you use. It's a good word. There isn't enough. And the Championship, as we know, because we've seen enough of it now in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, brutal, unforgiving. You'll be walked all over metaphorically if you exhibit any sign of weakness. And this team have soft underbellies, and they. When the adversity hits, they find new ways to roll over, and it is staggering because, when you look at the Portsmouth away game, for example, even Blackburn, they did face adversity. Stoke and Coventry, to put them in the same bracket, and not through particularly polishing performances, but they did have those characteristics. Where have they gone in the last few games? When they have their backs to the wall, that they dig in and they resist. And the one thing we did think from Torup to Manning that he had managed to already instill was that baseline behaviours, to use a Manning mannerism, where you go away from home maybe, or you're at home and things aren't going well, but you dig in. Well, that seems to have unravelled as well now in his last 2 or 3 games, either side of the international break. And you have to start questioning now very seriously, are those players on board with this man's methods? Because they don't look like a group of players who are.
Well, that's what he said today, isn't it?
Yeah.
In many ways.
Well, I mean, there was a line about, I don't ask them to play laterally and, I want them to show aggression and run beyond. And you think, well, dear me.
Well, he was making the point, wasn't he, essentially, that today, because, and I don't know if he made this point in the press conference, but certainly in his radio interviews, that he wanted them, he knew the weekness for Bristol City was in behind. He'd asked them to go and play in behind.
Yeah.
And they didn't do that.
No. So, where on earth do you go with that, where the instructions from the head coach are either being ignored or they can't execute what they're being asked to do? It's farcical, really. And it doesn't cast Manning or his coaching staff in a great light, and it doesn't cast those players in a great light. And the net effect of that is what we see now in those numbers. All those trends are regressive. Regressive trends was what did for Torup. I would suggest that in the worst part of the Torup trough, we wasn't where we are at the moment with this guy. So, and it's the same sporting director. So if that logic's still being applied, then he is definitely on borrowed time. And maybe if he goes, then it'll be the sporting director who will swiftly follow him out the door. Where that leaves Norwich in terms of direction of travel, I don't know. But that is the seriousness of the situation that now is in front of Mark Attanasio, Norfolk Holdings. Some serious decisions need to be made over this period of time. Otherwise, this club could, as we fear, find itself back in League One, which is definitely not where Mark Attanasio is thinking he wants to take this football club. That's not the journey he had envisaged when he took full control. So, let's not downplay it, the seriousness of it, or maybe suggest that we're trying to overhype the situation. I think it is as grave as that. Because if you've got a head coach saying they're not really following my instructions, and you've got a group of players who are going out and not performing as they have done again today, then that's only going to end one way, and that's, you know, people losing their jobs and maybe a team heading to League One. And you know, the sooner those in charge probably understand that and maybe realise that this cannot be allowed to drift for any perceived period of time, because if it is, it'll be probably beyond the point of no return, and that feels, again, probably premature 10 games in. But I think you have to be honest and say, what is there at the moment that you could hang your hat on and say this will get better under Liam Manning and Ben Knapper? There's nothing.
Or what has got better under both of those guys, and that's the other point. And I mean, just to kind of, I guess, round off Sam on the players, because clearly there are points that we are making that are linked with other people, and we will come on to those, because it is clearly it wasn't the players' names that were being chanted today, and we will come on to those. But again, for a squad that was deemed to be, you know, this could be a top 6 squad. This could be a group of players. Look at how the way we've got, and I'm using this as an example because it's unfair because he didn't play today and he's injured. But look at the way we've got Mateus Chris-Goran out of Bromby. Look, Papa Amadou Diallo. Look at the competition we've fought to sign him. Pella Matson, we've tracked him all summer. Case after case after case of this. Jakov Medic, someone we signed from Ajax. I can't really understand why they've signed him, because they want to play with a high line, and he's just not a player that's capable of doing that. So case after case individually we can go for from a recruitment perspective. And I think it's easy to retort from a fan perspective of, but everyone was excited about the summer. Well, they're going to be. They're fans. They want to be optimistic. They want to believe that every player that comes in the door is going to be a massive success. They want to give people the benefit of the doubt. And this is where we're probably straying into recruitment and maybe Ben Knapper to an extent. But for this group of players that was ranked that highly, for these individuals that were ranked that highly, that Norwich have paid significant fees for some of them, to be where they are, for us to be talking in very serious terms about them being in a relegation battle 10 games into a season, absolutely staggering.
Yeah, well, I think the first point I'd make on that, the idea that fans were excited, you know, in the summer, and it's all
but
in
you could
hindsight.
sign Mickey Mouse, couldn't you? And people would be excited.
And it's also, you know, that's the reason why people at Norwich City who recruit players and sign players and look for them are paid enormous sums of money to work in football, and fans are not, because they're supposed to be the experts who can decide who to get excited about. So, you know, theoretically, if those types of people are picking out these players and deciding to spend such huge sums by championship standards on these players, then the fans should have every right to get excited about them. You know, you're effectively telling them by signing them as, you know, football experts who are employed to be football experts that they should be excited about these players who you're bringing in. So, yeah, I agree with you on that point. But yeah, I think I keep coming back to it, and I just think the value for money that they've got in that squad right now, and probably going forward as well, this is part of the problem that I don't see many of them improving loads more than they currently are. I think the value for money is dreadful for what they've got at the moment, and it's kind of a strange one, because when I go and speak to fans, quite a lot of them say that they think the players are good enough, that the players have the qualities to turn it around. And it could just be that I'm wrong and they're right, to be fair, but sometimes I wonder if there's so much blame on the head coach, so much frustration with the head coach and with other people, that we kind of overlook the players sometimes, because I think, you know, there's the separate point of desire and behaviours and all of these things that Liam Manning likes to talk about that I don't think were there today, but also just the quality. I just don't see any of them, really many of them, anywhere near the sorts of fees that they've paid for them. I think there are some in there who would fine championship footballers who would go into the 11s of maybe 12 or 13 teams in the championship. But the problem is, those players in the market, you can get a lot of them for 500k, 1 million. And Norwich are paying 4 or 5 million for these sorts of players. And that's where a lot of the problem comes for me, that they're not signing players to be an average championship team. The amounts of money they're spending and the ambitions they've got, this team should be right up towards the top of the championship. And when you're spending that amount of money, I understand the whole patience thing, and to be fair, rightly, I think we provided the context that it would take a long time under Johannes Torre. But I don't think that when you look at individual players, you should be paying 8.5 million for someone who needs 2 years in the championship to adapt. You know, you can get those sorts of players. You can get those potential players who aren't really near the level yet for 2-3 million, and they might have massive talent. But the reason they're not as expensive as an Ante Cianats or a Mate Jurasek is because they're not there yet. I think the reason why you pay the sorts of fees that they have for these sorts of players is that they should be there really straight away. They should have the quality to come into the Championship without much of an adaptation period, especially longer than a few months and certainly longer than one season. So I am concerned about the quality of the group. I think it's a group that probably is better than where they are at the moment. But I don't see it being a group that right now is anywhere near the levels that they want to be in terms of competing for the playoffs, being in the playoffs. They want to get promoted to the Premier League this season. And I don't think the squad now, as much as there are issues with the coaching, there are bigger issues at the club. I think the players are almost as much of an issue as those things, because I just don't think the quality is there to do what they want to do this season.
And I guess that, Paddy, segues nicely into a conversation about the sporting director, Ben Knapper, who, to be fair, today, and we were all in Carrow Road, it felt like he was taking the brunt of the fan chants. As I said, there were some towards Liam Manning and Zoe Webber as well, which we will come on to. But that point that Sam raised there, £55 million for over 2 years that he's been here, free transfer windows in effect. Ante Cianats for 8.5 million, Mate Jurasek for nearly 6, Chris Goran for nearly 7. Admittedly, we haven't seen a lot of him as of yet. But and of course, there's the net spend aspect. I know people like that. Norwich are 19 million in the green, so to speak, in terms of the player sales, but they have still spent £55 million on this current squad. And as Sam said, from a value of money perspective, that feels like they've overpaid, quite frankly, on what we're seeing at the moment. And the second point I would make is the general composition of the squad. The amount of players in this group in this group that are in year 1 of Championship football or year 2 of Championship football. There's so many of them, and you're almost expecting them as a collective to go and, as Sam said, not just adapt to the league, not just compete in the league, but thrive in the league to try and be a top 6 side. The balance of the squad, the spend of the squad, all of it feels quite a way off where it should be at the moment, and that ultimately comes down to Ben Knapper, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, as you're saying that, 19 million in the green, and let's get it straight, he's done a very good job of trading players out, but he didn't sign any of those players. So Adam Ida, Gabi Zara, John Rowe, Abu Kamara, Borja Science this past summer, none of those were signed by him or the people in his recruitment network. So while having extracted good amounts of sale figures, nobody would dispute that.
But again, not to go Roy Keane, but that's his job, isn't it?
That is his job, yeah. But my point is, none of those players were players that were recruited inward. And to take Sam's point, who of the ones he's actually signed could they turn around in the next window and get more than they brought them in for? Yeah. None of them. Yeah. None of them. So, certainly with each passing cycle under Liam Manning at the moment, it brings into sharp focus the recruitment failings. Let's get it straight. What I would say is, though, this past window, you can't really come out and judge Chris Garden Deal. You can't judge Papagiallo, any of those ones who came in this summer. You can obviously judge in terms of Medic, to go back to your previous point about is he a fit for what they're trying to do stylistically, but you can't judge him as a player and as an inward piece of business, I don't think, definitively. 9 games in, 10 games in, and obviously Chris Gordon and Jallo doubly so because they're injured. But track it back to the last summer, Ante Cianats, he's had enough time now. I think we can start to make a more informed, data-led in terms of his Norwich performances. Is he an £8.5 million player? Not unless you're talking lira, that's for sure, because he is regressing with each passing game. Jurasek today, I thought, was borderline disgraceful. I thought that outing from him today, he looks unfit. Technically, he was all over the shop. He's regressing in a big way, and that's down to him, but it's also down to Liam Manning and the coaching staff. How are they making
8 million
and the recruitment as well? Yeah, so it's not good. If we're extrapolating in this debate at the moment in terms of the Norwich situation, the recruitment, then I don't think you get too many who would say Ben Knapper and Lee Dunn and all the people around them have pulled any rabbits out of the hat at the moment. But as I say, I would reserve judgment on the summer intake because they clearly need time to adapt and play games And Jallow may go on to prove good business as Chris Gordon. But if you zoom out, I mean, Ben Knapper, you did the piece, just clocked up 2-year anniversary. I'll ask you boys, are Norwich further forward as a football club in the 2 years Ben Knapper has been at the helm?
No, is the short answer.
Is 2 years a long enough body of time to have affected more change than he has done in a positive fashion? I would say yes. So, if this is a verdict on Ben Knapper and what he's done at Norwich, it's not favourable.
Well, let's take the first season that he was in charge. They finished 6th, and they're now, as things stand, 10 games
under a head coach who he didn't want.
Correct.
Yeah. And was very keen from very early out in that season to put a plan in place to remove that head coach. So, can he claim huge amounts of credit for that? Not really, I don't think.
No. To be fair, I'm not giving him credit. I'm just saying in terms of, like, you think about where he took it up as a team that were in a bad place when he came in. Admittedly, Wagner turned it around. They were in the playoffs. Someone posted, I think earlier, a screenshot of that team lineup in the Leeds semi-final. You look at the list that was on there, some of the talent that was on there, the players that were on there, and you compare that to now, and it's no imitation really. And I think, Sam, this is the wider point, isn't it? And why Ben Knapper is getting so much scrutiny, because it feels to me, and clearly the aim has been about trying to bring him into individuals, trying to develop them, trying to sell them on. Fine as a strategy. I don't think that can be what you're about as a football club. I think that needs to be a pillar of what you're about. And equally, it feels it's been geared more towards that than it has been probably producing a balanced team that can win games of Championship football. You think back to 18-19, when they got both of them married up, it was as a byproduct of a team winning games with a certain style of play and in a certain fashion that they developed players and were able to sell them on. Hasn't always been the case. There have been bad teams that they've managed to get individual players out of. As Pad said, none of them were signed under him. I just look at that squad now, and it feels very little variation in it. You take central midfield as an example. All their midfielders feel like different shades of the same colour, rather than completely different in terms of their style. And again, it comes back to that eye-watering figure of £55 million. So that's not a sum of money that Norwich have been blessed with in the Championship ever, really. And as you said, we're kind of going full circle here, but for the value of money, it feels completely off. And then you throw in as well a strategy where they've gone from, as Pad said, David Wagner, which whether you did or didn't like his style of play, got them into the top 6. People weren't happy with that. I didn't think it was the best style to watch. I didn't necessarily agree with the way that they did it in terms of packing a group full of players who were sort of 30 plus, to be polite, and trying to do it that way. Then you pivot and you handbrake turn. You go to a more progressive head coach who wants to play a very different style of football. You recruit in that way. You tell everyone that this is going to take time. You then get 10 months in, you get kind of bored with it. You feel the trends aren't going in the right direction. You sack him, you handbrake turn again. So there's the recruitment point, but there's also a strategy point here. In Norwich, and to be fair, this is true since they've been relegated from the Premier League, and arguably since they sacked Daniel Farke, that has just been the flip-flopped and complete mismatch all the way through. It isn't just Ben Knapper, it was also the back end of Stuart Webber, and they've clearly had different ownership groups in that stage as well. So however you kind of split it up, as Paddy says, by every measure, if we're going to put it into very binary questions like that, it's difficult to see any measure, any fabric of the club. They're not really bringing players through from the academy now as a general rule of thumb. They've kind of pivoted away to signing them and trying to develop them. It's difficult to score him highly in any other sort of column beyond extracting money for players.
Yeah, and I think when you were talking there, for me, it just comes back to the purity of the strategy, because you look at all of the successful teams that Norwich have had over the last few years, it's been aligned, and to be fair, Stuart Webber and Daniel Farke used to talk about this a lot, about everyone in the club pointing in the same direction, about everything being clear and going in the same way. And for me, there's not been enough in the last few years of a clear direction where everybody's pointing in the same way and all of the factors going into it kind of marry. I think you look at the Farke and Webber era, there were all of those things of kind of progressive football, and it was maybe more of the time, to be fair, than it is now, but of possession-based football, higher pressing, young players, talent from abroad, a head coach from abroad, of course, their first one, and as one of the pillars of it, as you mentioned, developing players and selling them on for more money. And all of those things, I think, work together and make sense as one unit. The Wagner era, the same thing, really. And although it was almost at the opposite end of the spectrum, and probably a lot of people didn't like watching it, and it maybe wasn't sustainable over a long period of time, at least everything was kind of together. You had a head coach who was very good at man management and could create a siege type mentality in the dressing room. You had a dressing room packed full of championship experience, and that was the recruitment strategy. That was what they wanted. They wanted experience, and they went and got it. A style of play that suited those sorts of players went a bit more direct when you had players who maybe didn't have the technical capability and were more behaviour type players and were more physical, and all of those things added up to a 6th place finish in the playoffs. And there was, at least, even if you didn't like it, a purity to the vision that David Wagner was selling and what he wanted. Then you go to Torup, and I know we keep going back to it, but that for me was the moment when Ben Knapper finally had all the things aligned that he wanted aligned. He wanted this strategy where you bring players in for relatively low fees, you get them from high value markets, and you sell them for more money. You had the very, very pure style of play that Torup didn't really want to go away from at all, possession-based, attractive, high press, and that sort of style of play should suit players who are younger, who are maybe less experienced in the Championship and are used to European leagues where those styles of play are more common. You had a young coach who was used to coaching young players and could bring players through the academy, and you had all of these things that lined up with one another. And even though it wasn't successful at the time, as it wasn't in Daniel Farke's first season, I think everyone was pointing in the same direction, and all the Norwich fans, whether they liked it or didn't, could tell you what Johan Torup and Ben Knapper were trying to do. Then they cut that off, and now they've got Liam Manning in, who says he wants proactive football, but it's kind of a bit turgid sometimes, and it can change from game to game, and it's, you don't really know what's going on. But then you still have the purity of the transfer strategy, where even though he's a head coach who might have liked a bit more Championship experience, apart from Darling, they still went all out for that high value, foreign markets type model with the recruitment. You've still got Knapper saying he wants to play a proactive style of play, and none of these things really line up. The academy element has almost completely vanished, as you referenced. And I just don't think there's that clarity of strategy, and it makes me look back at when things haven't been successful. Dean Smith, that was the last time for me. David Wagner, I think, was fairly ideological in his own way. Torup was. Manning isn't, and Dean Smith wasn't. And I keep getting so many reminders of that Dean Smith era in the feeling of the press conference, the way that the team looks, the incoherence of the style. And I think, it comes back to the purity of the vision, the alignment of the strategy, and everyone going in the same direction. And that hasn't been the case when Norwich have been unsuccessful, and it's not the case now. So I think that tells you quite a large part of the story for me.
Part 2, we will talk about Liam Manning. We will talk now about what I think will become an infamous night in the mouth of the Barclay stand, with everything that came on Wednesday night, with those River End and Carrow Road generally redevelopment. That open meeting, we will discuss all of that, and we will see you in just a second. Welcome back to the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast. Groundhog Day again, I'm afraid, folks, talking about another Carrow Road defeat and another desperately poor time for the football club as a whole. We've kind of touched upon Ben Knapper, we've touched upon the players. Paddy, feels like we're kind of making our way through the various protagonists in this particular story, or antagonists, however you want to describe it. Liam Manning, we know how football works, and you can live in this nice fluffy land where you want people to be given time and you don't want people to lose their jobs. We've seen Ange Postecoglou today go after 39 days. That's the world that we're in. 2 wins from 10, 6 Carrow Road defeats in all competitions, an East Anglian derby defeat. where does he stand in all of this mess? Because ultimately, as we know, when football clubs look for change, it's quite often in the dugout and with the head coach where that process tends to start. It
is. I think today, though, was revealing in terms of, and it's not scientific, but it was Ben Knapper who was the eye of the storm in terms of the fan frustration, which, rightly or wrongly, would suggest that it isn't just about Liam Manning or Liam Manning's removal, and then suddenly the world is a brighter place if you've got anything to do with Norwich City, and I think that is the case. Chris Sutton's column last week: how many head coaches since Farker have they tried? It can't just be remove the head coach and we'll move on to a brighter outlook. There's something deeper, something more structural, something in terms of the ethos of what this club's trying to be. Sam captured it there in his answer just before part one. Really, it's not. Do
you know what it is? I mean this seriously. No. Do you know what they are trying to do here?
I can't see it. No, I can't see it. I don't see a clear-headed, top-to-bottom strategy that, even though if it isn't fully formed at the moment, and bringing that right round to Liam Manning and the football, that clearly isn't fully formed. That just looks like a mess at the moment. Just this, never-ending kind of.
It's almost football, isn't it? That's kind of
head against the wall type football, really, and just hope it's like doing what's that definition of madness? Doing the same thing over and over and hoping it will change. That's where we are. I said it after the game. That was like they'd press pause at Portman Road and just press play at kick-off today. What have they done in the intervening 2 weeks to adapt the errors or the structural elements of what's not happening? And for me, that's control of the midfield and possession and progressive passing. He talks about that, but another game ticks by, another training cycle ticks by, and we see pretty much today what we saw at Portman Road, what we saw at Coventry, Stoke, et al. And that lack of progression must be deeply troubling in terms of Liam Manning and his job prospects. But that's because we've spent a huge swathe of this podcast talking about, I think, a squad that isn't fit for purpose, that is lacking in a lot of the areas you'd need to have to be a realistic top six contender. That doesn't change with the removal of Liam Manning. They may bring in a head coach who's a better fit or better aligned with his group of players, and that might produce an uptick in performances from certain individuals and maybe the collective. But I still don't think that you're going to go from what they're producing at the moment to transformational difference in output over a consistent basis. So it isn't solely for me about Liam Manning, but equally, I think you would expect by 10 games in that you're seeing something which is better than coughing up another 20-odd shots to the opposition at Carrow Road, losing another Carrow Road game, not having any control, not seemingly having any idea of how to progress the ball from back to front, to create chances, to build pressure, to win games of football. So all of those elements are at Liam Manning and his coaching staff's door, and it must be concerning now to him that he's actually having to more or less detach himself. As much as he said we're in it together, if he's calling players out for a lack of hunger and a lack of willingness to sort of to hide, which is what he was today, that usually doesn't end very well, I don't think, because are those same players you're going to get a tune out of them at Derby and at Swansea? I have my doubts. So it felt going into today's game, this was a big week, and that's even more the case now. I just don't see how you persist with a head coach who is producing this low level of output in terms of the resource he's got. Now you can debate whether this is a top six calibre squad, and then that flows back into the recruitment debate. But equally, I still think it's a group of players that are better than 8 points from 10, and that's on him as the head coach of that team. So, I think I had to ask him again, as I did after the Ipswich game, will you get the time to turn it around? And he repeated what he said at Ipswich. He'll be in tomorrow morning, doing his utmost to try and do that until somebody tells him different. And if that's the case, then, the decision ultimately won't rest with him. It'll be those above him. So, but it's not looking good. Any way you cut it, and the way he was barracked from start to finish by those Bristol fans, they clearly would have you feel that Norwich have maybe made the wrong call by appointing him. And at the moment, there's little evidence in the debit column, or in the credit column, sorry, to suggest that was the right call. And it's a shame, because on a human level, I mean, we all know the terrible situation he had to deal with as a family, and you know, pertinent that it was Bristol today, and it was, you know, not long after the 12-month anniversary, I think. So on a human level, any dealings we've had with him and interactions, you know, and we got some really good access when we was out in Holland with them on tour, and I'd love to see him on a personal level turn it around, but you know, that's the romantic personal element, and unfortunately where Norwich are and where they're striving to be, and what league they're in and the outlay they've committed to, those elements will probably recede into the background, and it will simply be, is he doing his job? No, he's not. So how long do you give him? And I think he's in the last chance saloon now.
Yes, and like you, I really like Liam. I think the Liam Manning that maybe you guys listening and watching will have seen in terms of press conferences isn't necessarily at points the Liam Manning that we've seen. You mentioned Holland; he was very different. I felt in terms of the personality that he exuded, very likeable guy, clearly very knowledgeable. You look at his career and what he's done. You underlay the local element that adds clearly some kind of sentimental value in terms of you really wanting the guy to do well, and you sense that as well when you speak to fans. They do want to get behind Liam Manning. They do want him to pull results together. But ultimately, as I kind of said, you often find these things start and end rightly or wrongly, fairly or unjustly with the head coach. And for me, Sam, it feels a lot like kind of the argument as people have tried to make it a little bit binary in terms of, well, it's either Ben Knapper or it's Liam Manning, or it's this or it's that or whatever. The truth is, it could be both, right? Like, it could be a poor squad that hasn't been recruited well, that they've paid a lot of money for the reasons that clearly we've already spoken about. And equally, it can be a head coach that is failing to get the best out of them, getting them into a place where they're coherent and cohesive and they have a clear style of play. This is kind of increasingly the position that I feel I'm in terms of, I don't think this is all on one person. I think it's everything and everyone. And you look, and this isn't necessarily on him, but and maybe do this in the last part, but you look at it out sort of broadly, we mentioned on the pitch, it doesn't really feel like a club that's got too much leadership off it at this moment in time as well. And you look at some of those guys that are in. I mean, we mentioned Ben Knapper, first time in the job, the head of recruitment lead done, first time as a head of recruitment, head of performance, first time as a head of performance. There are so many examples across the club of people doing that, and you know, certainly not to go back to Knapper, but you just wonder, is this the type of club where in the first role as a sporting director, he's got enough support, enough challenge, enough people who maybe can add little bits around the side, little bits of experience and knowledge that he doesn't have. Liam Manning clearly isn't in that boat. But yeah, I've gone off on a tangent there a little bit, but to bring it back to my central argument, clearly there is a culpability in this, and nobody wants Norwich to become Watford or to become a club that churns through head coaches. But equally, to Paddy's point, at what stage does the point come where you have to at least give something else a try? You know, if is 10 games too early? Is it, you know, that's kind of the world we're in now with modern football, isn't it? Whether you think it's madness or sanctity.
Yeah, and you know, ultimately there is a reason why clubs consistently bow to that pressure and do make those sackings much earlier than maybe seems sane. But I do think it's, as you kind of mapped out, it's more of a complicated thing than just, is it Manning's fault, is it Knapper's fault, is it the player's fault? You know, I know it's very easy to look for that binary one person to blame, because ultimately it's easier to get rid of one person than it is to get rid of a full squad of players and a head coach and a sporting director and kind of, do a sort of root and branch overhaul. But I think probably most people do know that, and you kind of sense that with the crowd reaction today, because there were chants for all sorts of people. It felt at times like there wasn't that big, powerful moment in the same way there was for Dean Smith in the Blackburn game, because in order for everyone to start singing at the same time, they would have all had to decide who they were going for. And I think there's discontent with kind of everyone at the moment. And obviously the off-pitch elements are not Ben Knapper's remit, but I have to say, when you look at all the problems and you say that everything's going wrong, injuries are happening far too frequently, you can say Manning is not the right head coach. The players don't look particularly good, and you can say, yes, that's different factors, and there's not the blame on one person or one set of people. But ultimately, when everything's going wrong, who do you look to? And for me, that's Ben Knapper, because his job is to oversee the whole footballing operation of the club. He is in charge of the footballing side of things. And if there wasn't the commercial bit and that kind of important but very separate side of the business, he would effectively be the CEO of everything we talk about every week on the podcast. So if everything is going wrong, then you can say that Manning's not a good enough head coach. Who hired him? You can say that the players aren't good enough to get them to get them promoted. Who signed them? You can say that there are too many injuries. Who's in charge of the sports science department? It's all Ben Knapper, and I think whatever happens with him, I think he knows right now that probably a lot of the focus is on him, and the fans ultimately, although I said there were a lot of names that people were turning to, I think they did decide in the end that probably the main person they were looking to was Ben Knapper. So yes, I think the problems are myriad. There are a lot of things to look at, but ultimately when there are several problems going on, you look to the man at the top and of the footballing operation. That's Ben Knapper.
It's like having a leaky pipe, isn't it? You feel like you've kind of put something over one hole and then another appears. Is kind of what it feels like at the moment. I think, Paddy, there's a lot in the fan base who kind of feel they're interlinked, both of these two people that we're speaking about, Ben Knapper and Liam Manning, for that reason that Sam said. You asked Ben Knapper at the time in terms of the personal capital that he put behind Johannes Torup, 10 months into a 3-year deal, sacks him. If Ben Knapper is then picking up the phone to Mark Attanasio again, hypothetically, after 10 games, and saying, look, I think I've got this one wrong as well and we need to make a change, 4-year deal, having paid not a lot of money, but having paid compensation for Liam and his coaching team as well, that surely leaves him in a difficult position. So are these interlinked as people think, or do you think that's too simplistic a way to look at it? Could you remove one and not the other, I guess, maybe is where the fan base will be at this?
Well, if it's the fan base, then no, I don't think that they would accept that, because what the removal of Liam Manning but not Ben Knapper would effectively mean is Ben Knapper is then leading his third head coach recruitment cycle in the space of about 6 months. Can't think there'd be too many Norwich fans who'd be happy for that scenario to play out. But this will boil down to Mark Attanasio and Richard Resler and Norfolk Holdings in terms of the future of Ben Knapper, that's for sure. But you would think it would be very, very difficult for him to remain in post and driving another cycle for when you've got, of the decisions that he has to get right, the head coach is probably at the very top of that list. And a removal of Liam Manning would be effectively saying he's got the two biggest calls since he walked through the door wrong. That's not a great track record. And why would you entrust him with a third head coach cycle? So
the problem is, and then thinking about this on a logistical level, say they
I know what you're going to say.
They get rid of both.
I know what you're going to say. Yeah.
Who then hires the next head coach?
Well, they'll have to cross that bridge, won't they?
Pete the Kit Man.
Well, let's not go there. But I mean, there's outside agencies, isn't there, for these things? So we know that the Attanasios particularly have some very high, powerful friends in football at various other clubs, Villa and Liverpool's two that spring to mind. So I think there's enough connections and networks that aspect of it wouldn't be the oh no, what we're going to do scenario that maybe you might envisage at this stage it would be. I think that part of the process could be rectified or could be bridged if it was in that scenario, and maybe what comes after Ben Knapper. But I just don't see how, to take your point there, Ben Knapper picks up the phone to Mark Attanasio anytime soon and says, I think Liam Manning's probably the wrong choice, we need to get rid. How Ben Knapper is still in post at that point either.
Yeah.
How could he stay in post? 10 games in, the manager who, and we had Mark on our podcast in the summer, was first, second, third, fourth, fifth choice. The only one he needed him to interview in terms of the end part of the process. To invest that amount of personal capital, having blown up the Thorup project, I just don't see how he stays stays to drive forward another process. And even if he did, how do you message that out to your fan base, and how are they going to accept that? As they've proven with the Carrow Road revamp, they're not the best at messaging these things. So good luck with that one.
Yes, and you risk becoming, like that character in Monty Python, don't you? 'Tis but a flesh wound, and it just keeps coming, and that therein becomes the problem. I think, to take Paddy's point, Sam, look, the other person that was in the line of fire, as you said, it felt very mixed and almost a scattergun of shots that were being fired from the fan base. Zoe Webber, and what do you make of that aspect? I guess that probably speaks to unhappiness at some of the off-pitch elements, particularly around this Carrow Road redevelopment, that ultimately, in terms of non-footballing side, does fall, as it would do with Ben Knapper on the football side, falls onto her shoulders.
Yeah, I think that's obviously going to be quite a major part of it, and it certainly was a major, if not the major, storyline running through the international break. So I think they're angry at that. And certainly there was a lot of criticism directed at her and Anthony Richards, the finance director, after that meeting that you went to on Wednesday, and I'm sure you'll tell us more about that. But I think that forms part of the anger, but also I think it's partly the fact that she's kind of the only thing connecting this regime to the old one that they were unhappy with, because obviously we talk quite often about the Farker Webber era and the joys of that period, but by the end of Stuart Webber's tenure as sporting director, there was obviously, fans were very unhappy with him. They were unhappy with Dean Smith. They were unhappy with David Wagner. And I think you look at that whole regime, there are obviously a few people who will be behind the scenes who have stayed. Neil Adams has obviously stayed as well, but I think Zoe Webber as executive director remains somebody who connects them to a period of time they were clearly very irritated with, because she was there throughout that whole time. Ben Knapper, Liam Manning, even the Atanasio's are relatively fresh, and although they're starting to get frustrated, and understandably so, with that regime, I think the old regime had become a little bit tired, and maybe that's why they're frustrated with her as well. So I think that wider context plays into it a little bit, but certainly you get the feeling that there is anger there over the River End proposals, and not necessarily just for the people who are going to have to move out of those seats in either the River End or the South Stand. I think for other people, and not just because they've got friends there or because they feel sympathy for them, but because it makes them feel like more of a corporate entity than a family football club that they have tried to be throughout their history, really. Certainly under Delia Smith and Michael Wynne-Jones, you couldn't say that fact wasn't there. And although obviously there are trade-offs to new owners, I think everyone knew things were going to change slightly when Atanasio and Norfolk Holdings came in. It was very much sold as Smith and Wynne-Jones wouldn't sell to someone who didn't have the club's best interests at heart, and it will be similar, and they do share values. And certainly, to be fair, there are ways that Atanasio and Resler and their partners could have been a lot worse as owners. But I think fans are feeling that family soul of the club has kind of gone a little bit with this River End decision. So clearly they're very unhappy with it, and there was an expression of that at today's game. But probably the greater expression was at this meeting on Wednesday. So I'm intrigued to hear more about that from someone who was there.
It's difficult if you weren't in the room to really convey the anger, the genuine fury in people's eyes, faces. I mean, I said it to you boys, you walk into AGMs as we do, and fan events and fan forums, and sometimes the atmosphere can be quite nice and relaxed and chilled, and you want to hear, and you get the sense people want to hear what they've got to say. There was absolutely none of that. I mean, within the structure of the meeting, there was basically two parts. They started with a presentation, which I think in hindsight was a bad decision, because essentially it was red rags to a bull, really, in terms of them basically going through everything they were going to do again, which clearly was a core reason why the majority in the room were absolutely furious. So you're just almost telling a group of angry people, this is why you're angry, by the way. Yeah. Didn't feel like the wisest move of that, and I did feel for Anthony Richards, who's clearly the finance guy. I think he's led on a lot of this, but he's not on the board. He's not somebody who is is in I recognise he's finance and operations director. He is in a senior position. I want to word this right, but he's not. He's not Mark Atanasio, he's not Richard Resler, he's not Zoe Webber in terms of responsibility on this front. But he stood up within the first 5 minutes, and the point he was trying to make was, I've been at Carrow Road, or I've been at the club for 5 years, and people have told me we need Carrow Road development. He got as far as, I've been here for 5 years, and the room burst out in laughter. That was within the opening 5 minutes. From there, we got to the Q&A, and it was just fan after fan after fan standing up very articulately, very emotively in some cases. There was a lady in the front row who was talking about her mother who'd been going to Carrow Road since the 1950s and who had sat in the River End for a long period of time, now has mobility issues. She's concerned about moving her seat, but also the alterations to her match day in terms of how she gets about. There was a father who stood up and spoke about his autistic daughter, and she sits in the River End, and with that condition, that change can be very difficult for those with it. And he gave the example of there was a case where there was a fan in home areas that got ejected for being drunken and disorderly, and it took his daughter 5 games really to want to come back to Carrow Road. That's kind of the levels of change, and was kind of asking about the planning and stuff that had been put in place. And the club said in both cases they would clearly prioritise moving those for balance, and I want to add that point. But it was real fury, Pad, and I think
someone walk out in the middle.
Someone walked out. Yeah, he asked a question. I can't exactly remember the extent of his question now, but he asked a question. There was, which was answered. There was a couple of follow-ups. He then stood up in fury. There was some choice language, but he basically said he wasn't going to renew his season ticket and that he was gone. And I think that's incredibly sad for somebody who followed. I remember it now. He was saying that he'd brought 2 generations of his family to Carrow Road via the River End. He wanted to take his great-grandson who'd just turned 3 and hoped to make that the 3rd generation, and was kind of making the point that he's always done that through the River End. Again, you kind of had fans making the point that why are you guys deciding what my match day experience should look like? Why are you telling me that my match day experience is going to be better? But clearly the frustration, Pad, and to link this to kind of events on the pitch at the moment, is the lack of consultation. This idea that some fans have at this moment in time, that they feel like they're not being listened to, that the club is just going to take decisions, and it's almost quite parental in terms of the club saying to them, we're doing this, like it or lump it, essentially. And I guess you could link that to where we are now in terms of, you see today, the reaction at Carrow Road. If there isn't changes, if there isn't something done, that sense that there's a big wedge between those in positions of power at the club who are making decisions with those fans that feel they're not being listened to, that's only going to grow, isn't it? But yeah, to come back to this River End point, it's another own goal that, quite frankly, they didn't need at the moment. I mean, it's kind of been made, well, maybe if we hadn't lost the games we'd lost at home, that the reaction would have been very different. I just don't accept that, really, because you're, as you say, evicting people, and you're not evicting them having taken them on a little bit of a journey. You're evicting them on the fact that you sent them an email when you dropped the statement, in terms of, our websites would have been, in many cases, the first time that people learnt about it. We didn't learn about it much before that. It's worth making that point as well. And as well, I want to make a separate point. I know the Canaries Trust and I think the Canaries Trust have sent an email out to members. I've also spoken to some people on the supporters panel who have made the point to me that, look, it wasn't a consultation with those guys either. They were presented plans and they were asked, look, what do you think the feedback is going to be on this? And I think there was, in some cases, some really robust responses. So I don't necessarily think a lot of the stuff that has fallen on them has been fair. But again, Paddy, it comes back to that central point I was talking about in terms of that distance between those at the top of the club and those who follow and ultimately will be paying the money. And this decision is probably another example, along with all of the footballing stuff that we've spoken about, that there's this gap at the moment, and dare I use the word disconnect.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And that the way it's been messaged is it's an improved fan experience, but people aren't stupid. They can see it's about commercial revenues, and it's about driving up the price points probably per head of people, and they obviously envisage that fan parks and moving away fans behind the River End and then home fans back into the South Stand, and then premium seating capacity, some those corporate areas that they've talked about as part of this roadmap as well. All of that is designed to increase revenues. it's disingenuous to suggest it's anything else. And so much has been wrong with the delivery of this plan that we could devote numerous podcasts to it, and we don't need to get into it in that depth. But you boil it down, you're evicting 3,500 of your most loyal supporters, as you say, very emotive, very powerful, generational stories of support. And what business does that to their most loyal customers? And I use the words business and customers because it feels that's how it's been portrayed. It's not a football club and its supporters, the lifeblood. It's a business, coldly, pragmatically, making decisions about customers and improving the yield from customers. And those fans who were in that meeting, those 3,500 who were affected, they don't see themselves as customers. They're fans. That club is in their blood. It's in their family. They want to pass it on to future generations, and they want to feel proud, and they want to feel that it's an entity that values that support and values those long family ties. And at the moment, if you're one of those affected fans, how could you think it's anything other than disdain that you're being treated with by your football club? And I think it's going to take a lot of work to bring a lot of people back on side, irrespective of what this now plan looks like and how it moves forward. Doesn't sound like, you tell me if I'm wrong, Connor, there was any sense from those on that top table that there was going to be any change to the plans.
Well, they were asked directly, actually. There was a question towards the end of what are you going to do with our feedback tonight? And
note it and then move on, I would suggest.
Correct.
Yeah, there you go, as if I was in the meeting itself. So, in other words, nothing. So they're burning bridges here, and
let
they need to be careful.
Let me link this to a football aspect, which is, and I don't want to keep going back to it, but the sale of Marcelino Nunez, which again, if we're looking at it from a business perspective, and we made this point, brilliant money, player in the final year of his contract, but it's naive to just do that given a whole layer of emotion that you add to it. It feels similar to this in many ways in terms of maybe the spreadsheets and the numbers and the costs of doing this, but then it comes back to, are the costs of doing it worth it? Is it almost a too clinical way to look at some of these aspects? Because it feels like from both that footballing decision perspective and also what we're talking about here, that kind of layer of emotion has been kind of stripped from it almost. And like you say, it becomes about revenues and customers and that. And that's not the way that football fans want to be spoken about or treated. No,
but maybe we don't want to be too romantic or too naive about it, because football clubs up and down the land, I'm sure, are treating their supporters in similar fashion. They are businesses. They need to make revenue. They need to turn profits if they can, because football is a money pit. We know that. We can see that in terms of trying to run to avoid standing still. Takes vast sums of money, and that money has to be recouped. We know that the Atanasio model, if you look at the Brewers, it's not sugar daddy dipping into their pockets and just trying to bankroll something. No, they're trying to build, or have done at least in 2 decades there, something sustainable. By being clever, by using data in a lot of their decision making, and that's the model they very much want to roll out here. So it's understandable that they're looking to maximise revenues, but to do that at the expense of the goodwill of 3,500 of your most loyal, passionate, dedicated, committed supporters seems very short-sighted and blinkered. And as you made the point there about these fan groups that were consulted, that they were told about the plans. It didn't sound like there was any consultation. Plans, So, you're getting talked at by your football leaders. You're not being asked what you think. You're being told this is the way it's going to be. Well, I wouldn't suggest that's the best way to move forward if you're trying to grow revenues, because try growing revenues when you've got a shrinking season ticket base.
Yes, and also try and sell more premium seating when this is the offering that they're offering on the pitch as well, quite frankly. And again, even that idea, I think we can get into the fact that these fans for so long have paid top-end championship prices. Absolutely. And then, you're saying, well, we're going to introduce a load of premium seating optically. I think that's really poor, if I'm honest, in terms of trying to sell that. And I also think the notion that, if we just win a couple of games and it'll all go away, I just think that's for the birds in this specific case, if I'm being honest. Sam, it's not been the most uplifting podcast. I think we can say that. and understandably so and rightly so as well, because look, we're here to reflect things. I think if there was a positive slant that any of us could have added, we'd have been delighted to have done so over the last hour or so. 2 away games now. Derby on Tuesday. I don't want to again joke, but for where Norwich are at in the table at the moment, a really big game against a team that's in and around them, and could potentially, if we're going to extrapolate this over a season, which is all we can do at the moment, could potentially be in a similar place to them. Then they go away to Swansea. How do they turn where we are here tonight on this Saturday evening, having watched what we saw at Carrow Road, into something where we're recording the pod next Sunday, speaking about, aren't they in a much better position? Is it just wins, or does it need to be more than that?
I think if they got 2 wins, then it doesn't need to be any more. To be honest, I don't think they right now are capable of producing any more. I mean, can you see a world where they produce 2 strong 90-minute performances? I think probably the best case scenario is that they can replicate what they've done earlier in the season. And to be fair, you look at the circumstances, their 2 championship wins so far have been away from home against Blackburn and Portsmouth, who it looks like will be in and around the positions that they're in at the moment. Derby are in that bracket. I would say Swansea probably end up in that bracket towards the end of the season as well. So there is, a precedent for them turning up and producing the sort of performance that probably, they need to get wins in these 2 games. I think for me, it would be more staving off the potential of Manning going and of things getting even worse for people. I think people would love performances, and to actually fully flip the mood and to make Carrow Road a positive place the next time we're there, I think the performances have to be good, but I just don't see that happening. So if I can put a positive slant on it, it's that these are the sorts of games Norwich have thrived on earlier on in the season, and that's probably the sort of performance that they'll be looking for, because I can't see them producing 2 strong footballing performances based on how we've seen them play in the last few games.
Just a number, 6 on offer. How many points do they get from the next 2?
1.
Pad?
1.
I'm also going with 1. What a sorry state of affairs. Look, thank you very much. If you've watched us on YouTube or you've got all the way through this podcast, it's probably not the best listening, but it's where they are at the moment. PinkUn.com, of course, the place to go. We will be in Derby on Tuesday night, in Swansea on Saturday for the next 2 games. All of the analysis, coverage and reaction in between them. Liam Manning, we're expecting to do a press conference on Monday, so you can tune in to that as well. We will see you for the next one. Goodness me.